Well, good morning, everyone. Buenos días. Welcome. Bienvenidos a todos que se unen esta mañana con nosotros. Thank you for everybody for joining us this morning. It is my pleasure to be here with all of you today. I am Claudia Flores. I'm the program supervisor for the Mini Street Family Resource Center. And here with us is Monica and Senia, both from the U.S. Immigration Law group, and they'll introduce themselves in a little bit more. But let me say that in Spanish as well. Buenos días, mi nombre es Claudia Flores. Soy la supervisora de programas por parte del Centro de Recursos Familiares Mini Street y estoy muy contenta de estar aquí esta mañana con Mónica y con Senia y dejaré que ellos se presenten en un poquito. Entonces, con eso, with that, go ahead and take it away, Monica and Senia.
Senia, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so my name is Senia. I'm the Outreach Coordinator with U.S. Immigration Law Group. We just want to thank everyone for joining us today and for this brief live Q&A. We hope to do these more for everyone in the community. Buenos días, mi nombre es Senia Martínez. Soy la coordinadora de la oficina U.S. Immigration Law Group y muchas gracias por todos los que nos acompañan esta mañana. Esperamos que vamos a seguir haciendo estas sesiones para ustedes para que seamos un recurso para toda la comunidad. So, muchas gracias.
Gracias, Senia. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Monica Kerms-McKeekian, and I am an immigration lawyer at the U.S. Immigration Law Group in Santa Ana, California, along with Senia. First, I want to thank all the partners at Mini Street Family Resource Center for hosting this Facebook Live event and really just allowing us to share critical information that is so important for our immigrant communities. However, I do want to acknowledge the nationwide protests that are rooted in racial injustice against Black communities throughout the country. And so I want to stress that this opinion is really a reflection of my own opinion and doesn't necessarily also reflect the politics of Mini Street Family Resource Center or U.S. Immigration Law Group. But I did want to say some words on the issue. So in no way, shape, or form do I or does our firm or any of our partners condone violence, looting, or harm to property. However, we do respect peaceful protests and the protests that are being organized to draw attention to the seriousness of the violence against members of the Black community and Black communities throughout the country. It's unacceptable. And so with that, we know that people from all races are gathering to stand peacefully against unconscionable violence. And it's important, though, for everyone to know that ICE and CBP under the Department of Homeland Security are being called on and deployed as backup to the National Guard and local law enforcement. And so I caution anyone who is not a US citizen to be extra cautious and vigilant if they so choose to participate in these protests. Lawful permanent residents are also subject to removal. And so if what the president says is true, and it's a true reflection of how civil disobedience is going to be prosecuted, then non-citizens are at grave risk of deportation. And so I'm sorry to begin this presentation on a bit of a somber note, but I assure you that our intentions are always to share information and tools that are going to empower and protect our community. And so I'm going to try to translate that into Spanish now. So, buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Mónica Kerms-McKeekian y soy una abogada de inmigración con la firma U.S. Immigration Law Group en Santa Ana, California. So, primero quiero agradecer a Mini Street Family Resource Center por organizar este evento junto con nosotros en vivo en Facebook Live y permitirnos compartir información crítica que es importantísimo para las comunidades de inmigrantes. Sin embargo, también quiero reconocer las protestas a nivel nacional que tienen sus raíces en la injusticia racial, contra las comunidades de raza negra en todo el país. Quiero poner énfasis en que esta opinión es mía personalmente y no necesariamente refleja la política de Mini Street Family Resource Center o de U.S. Immigration Law Group. Pero de ninguna manera se tolera violencia o destrucción de propiedad, o destrucción de propiedad. Pero, sin embargo, respeto las protestas pacíficas que se organizan para llamar la atención sobre la gravedad de la violencia contra comunidades negras en todo nuestro país. Es importante saber que ICE y la patrulla fronteriza CBP bajo el Departamento de Seguridad Nacional están siendo implementados como respaldo para la Guardia Nacional y para policía local. Y advierto a cualquier persona que no sea ciudadano estadounidense que tenga mucho cuidado, que esté cauteloso y esté atento si es que deciden participar en estas protestas, porque sabemos que hasta residentes permanentes legales están expuestos a procesos de deportación y expulsión de los Estados Unidos. Y si lo que el presidente dice es verdadero, es un verdadero reflejo de cómo se van a procesar, cómo se va a procesar desobediencia civil, ciudadanos no estadounidenses corren mucho riesgo de ser sujetos a procesos de deportación. Así que lamento comenzar esta plática con un tono un poco sombrío, pero les aseguro que nuestra intención siempre es compartir información importante que puede proteger a nuestra comunidad y darles fuerza. Entonces, muchas gracias por darnos el tiempo de hacer esta presentación hoy y con eso creo que estamos listas de empezar.
Gracias, Monica. Thank you, Monica. So for everyone who has been joining us this morning, if as Monica presents and gives us information, feel free to use the chat box as a way to write down your question. I did receive a few questions via email, so I'll go ahead and post those as well. Para ustedes que se unen esta mañana, por favor vamos a usar el chat como la herramienta para escribir nuestras preguntas mientras Mónica nos comparte información. Ya después tendremos tiempo para contestar sus preguntas. Muchísimas gracias.
Okay, so the topics for today's Facebook Live event are COVID-19 testing, impact payments, also known as the stimulus checks, the California stimulus payments, and the County Relief Fund in Orange County, as well as issues related to public charge. So los temas de esta plática hoy son pruebas de COVID-19 o coronavirus, los pagos de estímulo económico emitidos por el IRS, pagos de estímulo del Estado de California, igual alivio financiero del Condado de Orange, y últimamente temas relacionados a la carga pública y a la prueba de carga pública. Okay, so, English, we're translating. Okay, so COVID-19 testing. So although USCIS has indicated that it's not going to consider treatment for testing of COVID-19 that's performed at government expense as an issue to consider for public charge. We know that the stimulus bill does not give states the option to provide Medicaid, and in California specifically, the program under Medicaid is Medi-Cal, to individuals regardless of immigration status. So testing is one thing, however, treatment is another. So fortunately, here in California, we know that Governor Newsom is mandating the state's Medi-Cal assistance program to cover care related to COVID-19 as emergency service. So this is regardless of whether or not the patient has immigration status or regardless of their insurance coverage. So what that, again, just to emphasize or just to clarify what that means, so folks who are applying for lawful permanent resident status in the United States will be subject to an assessment of whether or not they are capable of becoming a public charge or otherwise using government benefits. And so if USCIS determines that that person is capable of becoming a public charge, then they may be denied the benefit, which would be the green card. And so one of the criteria for assessing public charge is whether or not the person has used public benefits. But fortunately, Governor Newsom in California has said that if someone is being treated for COVID, it will be under emergency Medi-Cal. And emergency Medi-Cal is not something that USCIS can use to make a determination for public charge. Now, it's important to note that that is only in California. I cannot speak to other states. And so it's important for anyone who's residing outside of California to look into whether or not treatment under COVID will also be classified as an emergency treatment. So, ahora en español. So, USCIS o Inmigración ha indicado que no van a considerar a pruebas de COVID-19 o coronavirus realizadas por el gobierno como carga pública. So, no va a contar como criterio en asesorar si la persona puede hacer carga pública en el futuro. Pero eso es solo referente a pruebas. El paquete de estímulo no da a los estados la opción de proporcionar Medicaid, específicamente en California, Medi-Cal, a todas personas independientemente de su estado migratorio. So, en California, afortunadamente, el gobernador Newsom ha ordenado que el programa de asistencia médica del estado, que es Medi-Cal, cubra atención médica relacionada con COVID-19 como un servicio de emergencia. Y eso no importa si la persona, va a ser sin importar del nivel de cobertura de la persona o su estado migratorio. Entonces, ¿por qué es importante? Es importante porque cuando una persona está aplicando para su residencia permanente legal, Inmigración ahora está haciendo una prueba para determinar si esa persona es capaz de ser carga pública o una persona que pide beneficios emitidos por el gobierno. Si Inmigración determina que la persona ha usado ciertos beneficios o beneficios públicos en un periodo de 3 años antes de pedir la aplicación, pueden determinar que la persona sí es carga pública y negarles esa residencia. So, es importante saber que en California, una persona que tiene un diagnosticado de COVID-19 o coronavirus, tienen el poder de pedir medical de emergencia para esa atención médica sin tener que preocuparse de cómo eso afectaría el futuro posibilidad de que apliquen por la residencia. So, eso es algo muy bueno. Eso es limitado al estado de California. Esto no necesariamente aplica en otros estados. Así que yo aconsejo que una persona, primero que nada aconsejo que aunque tengan estado migratorio o no, aunque tengan seguro de médico o no, si una persona se encuentra diagnosticado con coronavirus, no duden en obtener ese tratamiento médico. Ya los efectos de inmigración en el futuro se resuelvan. Es importante que no se detengan a obtener esa atención médica por miedo y ya después ver cómo se puede, cómo pueden evitar una determinación de carga pública. También, esto solo, quiero poner énfasis que esto solo es en el estado de California. Entonces, los que están viviendo afuera de California deben de investigar si pueden también pedir un tipo de Medicaid, so, cobertura médica bajo un plan de emergencia, porque eso no es algo que afecta la aplicación de la residencia. Okay. Okay, so moving on to impact payments. So we know that beginning in March of this year, the IRS began to issue impact payments to folks who qualified. So who qualified? So individuals who filed their taxes as single, okay, needed to have had an adjusted gross income of up to $75,000 in order to receive the check for $1,200. So anyone who was an individual filing single who made more than $75,000, that didn't necessarily mean that they couldn't get a check. It just meant that it would be adjusted. And so I believe that the adjustment was for every $100 above $7,500, the check was reduced by $5. And then anyone who was filing as a married couple who filed joint tax returns with an adjusted gross income of less than $150,000 was then issued a check for $2,400. Again, those amounts, any amount reported above $150,000 then was adjusted accordingly. So in addition, filers who had children under 17 years of age also received an additional $500 for each child. Now, there's something very important to take into account, and that is that any individual who does not have a valid social security number, so someone who perhaps is filing taxes with an ITIN, an individual taxpayer identification number, is not going to receive the stimulus check, okay? And unfortunately, anyone who has a social security number but filed joint with an individual who does not have a social security number and has an ITIN, unfortunately was also excluded. So what does that mean? It means that, for example, a person who perhaps is married to someone without a social security number, if that person is a citizen and they file taxes jointly with their spouse who is not a citizen and who does not have a social security number, then they are not going to get this. Neither member of that household will receive the stimulus check, unfortunately, under that tax, under those taxes filed. So at this point, we know that most of the payments have been made by the IRS. However, there are still folks who have not received payment, and so there are different remedies for inquiring as to whether or not you're still eligible or you should have received it. The primary resource is going to be irs.gov, the website, the IRS website, in which you can input your information to see what the status of your payment is. Perhaps you did not file taxes in 2019 or in 2018. There is an opportunity for you to input your information into the IRS website and to register yourself so that you are still considered for receiving the stimulus check. I would highly recommend doing so. Perhaps there is a household who still hasn't filed taxes given the extension for 2019, in which there are members of the household with ITIN numbers. In that case, a married couple is able to file their taxes as married but separately, so that at least the person who has the social security number can still try to recover the stimulus money that they would otherwise be eligible for. And so for that, I would definitely recommend speaking with your accountant or with a certified public accountant to determine whether or not that's still a possibility. And then lastly, individuals who are non-US citizens, but who are in the United States, whether it be as lawful permanent residents or as non-immigrant visa holders, are also recipients or have also been recipients of the stimulus package or the stimulus checks, as long as they meet the tests that have been put forth by the IRS. And those tests are the green card test. So anyone who has had a green card at any point in 2019, 2018 qualifies for the stimulus check, even if it was, just for a short period at the end of the year. It doesn't matter, that's fine. The only exception is if the green card holder had their green card revoked, either by USCIS, an immigration judge, or if they affirmatively abandoned the green card by filing the paperwork in which they would declare abandonment of their green card. So if the green card was taken away or abandoned, then in that case, there's not going to be a stimulus check. The substantial presence test requires that the person was present physically in the United States for at least 180 days between the years 2017 and 2019. And then they have to also have been present in the United States in 2020 for at least 31 days. Okay, so sabemos que en marzo de este año el gobierno federal, a través del el servicio de impuestos o IRS, empezó a dar pagos de estímulo de $1,200 para individuos que registraron impuestos y declararon un ingreso de 75,000 o menos, ingreso bruto, so adjusted gross income o ingreso bruto no total, de $75,000 o menos. Y por cada $100 sobre esa cantidad, entonces se quitaba $5 del pago de 1,200. So, sí ajustaron para gente que reportó un ingreso bruto de más de $75,000, dependiendo de esa cantidad. Y matrimonios o hogares en donde parejas registraron impuestos como casados con un ingreso bruto de $150,000 o menos, recibieron un pago de $2,400. Por cada $100 sobre esa cantidad mínima de 150,000, entonces reducieron la cantidad de 2,400 por una cantidad de $5 igual. No, creo que eran 10. Contribuyentes que registraron sus hijos menores de 17 años también recibieron $500 por cada hijo. Ahora, tal vez, ahorita se supone que ya la mayoría de estos pagos han sido emitidos, pero sabemos que hay gente que no han recibido, que tal vez calificaban, o tal vez no calificaban, pero tienen pregunta o tienen la duda. Primero que nada, aconsejo que visitan el sitio web de irs.gov, para registrar su información para ver el estatus de ese pago, si no lo han recibido hasta el momento. Si una persona hizo impuestos utilizando un número de identificación de contribuyente individuo o ITIN number, sabemos que esas personas no califican para el pago de estímulo federal y no recibirán esos cheques. Igual una persona que tiene estado legal, que califica para recibir el pago de estímulo, pero registró impuestos con un familiar que tiene o que utiliza el número ITIN y no seguro social, tampoco van a recibir los pagos, los descalificaron. Un ejemplo es una persona que es estadounidense, que está casado con alguien que no tiene número de seguro social válido. Si registraron los impuestos casados, como juntos y casados, no van a recibir ese cheque. Igual si registraron un hijo como depende que tiene un número ITIN. Posiblemente, si no han hecho los impuestos del 2019 todavía debido a la extensión para hasta julio, pueden intentar de registrar impuestos como casados, pero separados. No que la pareja está separada, pero que los impuestos están siendo registrados independientemente. Posiblemente a la persona que califica o que tiene ese número de seguro social puede intentar de recuperar esa cantidad de 1,200. Aconsejo que se comunican con su contador, un contador certificado para averiguar si es posible y de ahí registrarse en el sitio de irs.gov. Ok, alguien que no tiene ciudadanía estadounidense, que está en los Estados Unidos tal vez como residente permanente legal o con una visa de no inmigrante, también puede calificar para el pago de estímulo, mientras que califican bajo una de dos pruebas. La primera prueba es la prueba de residencia. Alguien que recibió su tarjeta su residencia permanente legal o su tarjeta verde. Si lo recibieron en el 2019, aunque fue a final de año por una semana, todavía califican como residentes y pueden pedir ese pago de estímulo. Y hay excepción. La excepción a eso es si la persona abandonó su residencia. Okay, si abandonaron la residencia o si la residencia fue cancelada por el servicio de inmigración o por un juez de inmigración, desafortunadamente no van a calificar. Aunque sí estaban en un estado legal por un tiempo, si abandonaron la residencia de los Estados Unidos, entonces no van a recibir el pago de estímulo. La segunda prueba es la prueba de presencia sustancial. Eso requiere que la persona estaba presente por 180 días entre 2017 y 2019 y que están presentes en el año 2020 por 31 días. So, si piensan, en base de esta información que estamos presentando, si piensan que deben de calificar para ese pago de estímulo, repito, pueden visitar el sitio web de irs.gov o a final de esta presentación vamos a publicar mi correo electrónico. Por favor, les invito a mandarme un correo electrónico y podemos investigarlo un poquito más si no han recibido ese pago. Okay, so just to reiterate a little bit, so who does not qualify for the impact payment? Again, it's individuals who file taxes using an ITIN. They're not going to be receiving the impact payment. Eligible tax filers who filed joint taxes with someone, either it be a spouse or a dependent who has also an ITIN instead of a social security number, are not going to receive that payment. And then anyone who is actually claimed as a dependent, so a child or a family member who is not filing taxes for themselves, but they're being claimed as dependents, they are also not going to receive an individual stimulus payment. And then just to reemphasize the possibility of a married couple who filed taxes married but separately, so independently of one another, the person who would otherwise qualify for the stimulus package perhaps, or the stimulus payment, perhaps is able to recover that $1,200 payment if they file their 2019 taxes as married but separate, if they have not done so already and if they have not received that payment already. Again, I would strongly suggest consulting with a certified accountant to inquire as to eligibility. Ok, so solo para repasar rapidito los que califican y los que no califican para el pago de estímulos, son personas que presentaron impuestos usando un número de ITIN, no son elegibles. Igual, personas elegibles que presentaron declaraciones de impuestos o taxis conjuntos con una persona, aunque sea cónyuge o hijo o otro familiar, registrado como depende, que tiene un ITIN en lugar de seguro social, no van a calificar. Y personas que son reclamados como dependientes tampoco van a recibir ese pago, a menos que sean hijos menores de 17 que si los papás calificaron por el pago, también van a recibir adicionalmente 500 por cada hijo. Y para personas contribuyentes que son elegibles pero presentaron impuestos como casados, con una persona, casados y juntos con una persona que no tiene seguro social, sabemos que no van a recibir el pago, pero posiblemente pueden todavía recuperar los 1,200 si no han registrado impuestos de 2019 y los hacen ahora como casados pero separados, independientemente uno del otro, a ver si todavía pueden recuperar esa cantidad de 1,200 y aconsejamos que consulten con un contador certificado para averiguar si todavía es posible. Ok, so, mucha gente desafortunadamente fue excluida. Let me transition to English first. Okay, so many people were not eligible for the federal stimulus payment. So they did not receive the up to $1,200 or up to $2,400 because of ineligibility at the federal level. And so in California, we know that our Governor Gavin Newsom announced a stimulus package that was aimed at providing assistance to California's undocumented residents. So this program, which is known as the Disaster Relief Assistance for Immigrants Program, or DRE, is is set to provide a one-time payment of $500 and up to $1,000, okay, to a household. So $500 per individual and up to $1,000 per household. Applications began being accepted, I believe it was actually May 18th for this program, and they're set to be accepted through June 30th, okay? So the enrollment period for receiving payments receiving payments under DRE is still open. However, once the funds are exhausted, then it will close. So it's possible that those funds will not last until June 30th. And so we highly, highly recommend that folks who qualify and who have not done so already contact one of the agencies that's responsible with collecting the information. So in Orange County, these agencies are CHIRLA, and so their information is listed here. And so it's not an application that can be completed online. People are required to call the agency and to provide their information directly to CHIRLA, as well as Asian Americans Advancing Justice is the other organization. So these are the only two organizations designated in Orange County for processing applications for funding under DRE. And many people have asked me, do I think that it's safe to provide their information? And so I think that in an attempt to prevent the federal government from accessing this information, the governor very strategically worked with partners to create a program in which it's being handled entirely by nonprofit organizations. And so I believe that someone who files these applications, their information will be maintained safe and confidential. And so I do encourage folks who are in very difficult financial situations presently who do qualify to go ahead and apply. And also in Los Angeles County, and I'll just say this, in addition to these two organizations, the third organization in Los Angeles that is also processing applications is Carecen. And so that information, I mean, if you just Google the Disaster Relief Assistance for Immigrants program, that information is accessible online. Okay, so sabemos que muchísima gente, desafortunadamente no calificó para los pagos de estímulo federales. Y debido a esto, nuestro gobernador en California, Gavin Newsom, anunció un paquete de estímulo que proporciona ayuda a residentes de California indocumentados. So el programa es conocido como DRE, Disaster Relief Assistance for Immigrants, y sabemos que proporciona pagos únicos de $500 por persona, $500 por persona y hasta $1,000 por hogar. So sabemos que no es la misma cantidad que estaba emitiendo el gobierno federal, pero es ayuda. Y si uno califica, yo pienso que es importante que piden la ayuda. Aplicaciones están siendo aceptadas por el momento hasta junio 30, pero es importante tomar en cuenta que cuando el dinero se acaba, igual se acaba el programa. Así que si no han aplicado, deben de hacerlo. La aplicación es una que se tiene que hacer por teléfono. Tiene que uno llamar una de las agencias designadas para dar o para procesar las aplicaciones. En el condado de Orange, alguien que es residente del condado de Orange, está limitado a 2 agencias que son CHIRLA y Asian Americans Advancing Justice. La información está publicada aquí, los números de teléfono aquí están publicados para que llamen. No hay aplicación electrónica en línea que pueden llenar, tienen que llamar. Mucha gente nos han estado llamando para preguntar si es seguro proporcionar información de uno a estas agencias. Y creo que debido a la preocupación de nuestro estado de que el gobierno federal tuviera acceso a la información, construyeron este programa de una forma en cual agencias de la comunidad están procesando las aplicaciones para mantener a esa información confidencial. Así que mi opinión personal es que si califican deben de aplicar sin miedo o sin pena que esa información estaría dispuesto o accesible al gobierno federal. No va a ser. Si tienen más preguntas sobre este programa, pueden visitar el enlace que está publicado en esta página. Igual pueden mandarme un correo electrónico y en cómo puedo ayudarles a tener acceso a la información. Con mucho gusto lo hacemos. Okay. Okay, so another program for funding in the County of Orange is the County Relief Fund. And so under the County Relief Fund, there is financial relief available of up to $800 to unemployed residents of Orange County. So there are 4 eligibility requirements, and those are: 1, you have to show valid identification, such as a driver's license or a passport. It does have to be valid, or even a state ID. You must be a permanent resident or a United States citizen. So legal status is required. Well, not just legal status, but specifically permanent resident status or US citizenship is required. Men are required to be registered with the Selective Service or the Armed Forces or the military. And you must be able to show proof of your loss of employment. So you have to show that you have had an economic loss during the pandemic. So the agency that is processing these applications is OC One Stop Center. You can find more information, Center South, excuse me. You can find more information on the County Relief Fund by visiting www.oconestop.com. Okay, so hay otros fondos que están siendo emitidos específicamente por el condado de Orange, y es hasta $800 por residentes que se encuentran sin empleo debido a la pandemia. Hay 4 requisitos para poder solicitar esta ayuda financiera. La primera es que tengan una forma de identificación válida, como una licencia, una identificación del estado o pasaporte. Tiene que ser vigente. La persona que está pidiendo la ayuda tiene que ser residente legal permanente o ciudadano de los Estados Unidos. So es importante que tengan la residencia o prueba que nacieron aquí o que se naturalizaron. Hombres deben de estar registrados en el servicio selectivo o el ejército o militar, y tienen que presentar pruebas de haber perdido empleo debido a la pandemia. So, la agencia que está procesando aplicaciones por esta ayuda financiera es OC One Stop Center North. Pueden visitar el sitio de ellos, que es www.oconestop.com, o llamar a los números publicados. Y lo siento, son OC One Stop Center North and OC One Stop Center South. So son las 2 oficinas, OC One Stop Center Norte y Sur. So pueden llamar cualquiera de los 2 números para solicitar más información de cómo tener acceso a estos fondos. Ok, so cambiamos un poquito de tema, que es carga pública, que lo platicamos un poquito referente a tratamiento médico. So, vamos a cambiar de tema un poquito y ahora considerar designación de carga pública, no debido a recibir atención médica, pero por recibir ayuda financiera. So, es importante tomar en cuenta, well, I'll do Spanish and then English, sorry. So, es importante tomar en cuenta que beneficios, que los pagos de estímulo no se cuentan como beneficios públicos, ¿ok? So, no se toman en cuenta para la carga pública, ¿ok? So, los pagos de estímulo están siendo hechos en base de fondos que las personas han contribuido, ¿ok? Eso que han pagado en sus impuestos. Así que no es que están recibiendo beneficios públicos, están recibiendo un pago por lo cual califican. Son créditos fiscales, y bajo la regla final del Departamento de Seguridad Nacional, créditos fiscales no se consideran en la evaluación de carga pública. So, con calma y pueden estar seguros que si reciben pagos de estímulo no están perjudicando sus posibilidades de obtener una residencia en el futuro. Okay, so it's important to take note that impact payments are not classified as public benefits, and so therefore they will not be used, or having received impact payments will not be used to assess whether or not someone should be disqualified for a green card under the public charge test. Impact payments are classified as tax credits, and under the Department of Homeland Security's final rule, we know that tax credits are not to be used to assess public charge. So with COM and with EASE, it's people are able to receive these impact payments that they're entitled to, that they've contributed toward in paying taxes, and so they should know that they can receive these payments without facing future consequences or negative consequences when or at the time that they choose or are able to apply for their lawful permanent resident status. Okay, so that concludes the presentation. On our website, well, here I would like to direct you to our website, www.usilg.net. On our website, we have a resources tab, and under that resources tab, we have several videos, which are sort of webinar based. And so in those videos, we discuss various topics, including, the future of DACA. We discuss how, different methods or different applications that are available for legalization. So we're currently working on putting together, we've done several Know Your Rights presentations, but we've never actually recorded one and uploaded it to our website. So we're actively working to get that taken care of and done, because we think that it's of great relevance now with the protests that are taking place. And so we just want people to know that in the event that they, again, if they do choose to participate peacefully in the protests, and for any reason they find themselves apprehended or in police custody, we want people to know that they have rights regardless of their status, immigration status. And so our goal is to have that video uploaded as soon as possible. And so if you visit our website, again, www.usilg.net, you will have access to that information. So esto concluye nuestra presentación. Quiero dirigirlos a nuestro sitio web, www.usilg.net. En nuestro sitio web tenemos una página de recursos en donde subimos varios videos de información importante, como por ejemplo sobre el futuro de DACA o cuáles son las opciones para obtener legalización en los Estados Unidos. Y activamente estamos preparando una presentación sobre los derechos de una persona indocumentada. Hemos hecho un montón de presentaciones de conocer conocer sus derechos, pero nunca hemos subido un video. Así que estamos preparando eso porque sabemos que ahorita durante estos tiempos en donde estamos viendo el deseo de mucha gente participar en las protestas pacíficas, deben de saber cuáles son sus derechos si por alguna razón se encuentran en custodia de la policía o de inmigración. Así que estamos trabajando para subir ese video lo más pronto posible y para que esos recursos también estén accesibles para los que visitan a nuestro sitio web. So, muchísimas gracias y ahora vamos a empezar con las preguntas.
Okay, so I sent you the questions, Monica. Thank you so much for that information. Muchísimas gracias por la información. Aquí te mandé las preguntas que he recopilado that I have gathered together.
Okay.
So they're by number. So if you see, there's question 1, 2, and 3 all the way.
Are those, because I see there's a question and answer in the...
Yeah, so that's one of the questions.
Okay.
So do you want me to just read them off and then you answer, or do you want to just answer as we go?
Well, I'll answer the one that's in the Q&A right now, and then because I'm technically challenged at times and I'm not seeing the other questions, so if you wanted to read it, that would be good. So I'll just read this one.
Okay.
And it's, if someone completed a non-filer application and has 2 children under 16, they only got the $1,200 stimulus check and no payment for the 2 dependents. Do you know why that might be? Okay, so I'm not actually completely sure, and that's something that I do encourage follow up on. And so if you wanted to send me specifically an email at my email address, mcrooms@usilg.net, I can try to find out more information or also provide that to Claudia. I think it's because, I mean, I don't know if there's a way when you filed the non-filer registry information, I'm not sure if specifically the IRS asks about children. So potentially that is why the $500 wasn't issued, perhaps because they don't have a verification of the children under 16 in this case. So I would certainly follow up on that, and I would follow up by visiting the IRS website and trying to see if there's any information specifically that addresses that, but also it's something that I can look into. And so I strongly recommend emailing me, mcrooms@usilg.net, so that I can follow up and provide that information. Yes. So
and just so that we, I know that time is passing us really quick. So if it's okay, Monica, this is being recorded as well. So everybody who registered for the webinar, we are going to be sending the recorded video. So if you need to go back and listen to some information, we can do so. Also, if you want to answer the questions in whichever language, you know, they're coming in, we can, I can also translate at a later time and send everybody the answers to the questions.
Oh, okay, so then we'll do that. Since I don't really have an answer for this one, let's go on to the next one and then we'll follow up on it.
Right. So one of the questions, it says, if someone has been working in the U.S. for a few years with a professional work visa and they are marrying a U.S. citizen and applying to adjust their status to LPR, how long is the process currently taking?
Okay, good question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the process on average depends on where the application is being processed. If the application is in Southern California, specifically in Los Angeles, Orange County, San Bernardino County, Riverside County, San Diego, it's been taking anywhere from 10 to 14 months. However, I don't know, I'm not quite sure yet. We don't know how that processing time is going to be impacted by COVID. So for example, if the applicants have already submitted the applications and they've already done their fingerprinting, then the application is certainly being processed. The USCIS offices are not yet open for to the public for the interviews. And so they're supposed to be reopening this month, but we've already seen that date get pushed back. So as of now, the date published is June 4th, so possibly on June 4th, they will resume the interviews in person. But until those interviews can resume, then the applicants will probably be stuck waiting to be able to complete their interview, which is required for the application's decision. So I'll just do that in Spanish. So la pregunta era para una persona que está solicitando la residencia permanente a través de cónyuge ciudadano, y esa persona ha estado en los Estados Unidos por un tiempo extensivo trabajando con una visa de trabajo. ¿Cuánto tiempo se demora el proceso de la aplicación? Y eso va a depender. Si la aplicación ya fue sometida y a las huellas, las biométricas ya se hicieron, entonces el promedio de tiempo de espera es 10 meses a 14 meses y es el sur de California. Pero por el momento inmigración está cerrado al público y debido a eso no estamos viendo movimiento en las aplicaciones de residencia porque tiene que cumplir con una entrevista en persona. So ahorita la fecha está indicada como junio 4, el día que van a volver a resumir esas entrevistas, pero ya hemos visto que esa fecha se ha empujado un poco más, así que no sabemos si actualmente inmigración va a volver a abrir el 4 de junio, pero por el momento esa es la fecha publicada.
Mm-hmm. As a follow-up question to that, it says, if they submit the application before the work permit expires, will they be expected to leave the country if the LPR process hasn't been finalized yet by the time the work permit expires?
Okay, the answer to that is no. So as long as the application for permanent residency, which is the form I-485, is pending, The person is not required to leave the country just because the employment authorization document has expired. However, if the I-485 application has not yet been filed and the beneficiary or the applicant is still in the United States on their work visa, that's a tricky question. That would require some further discussion because it depends on a number of things. So, you know, the recommendation would be that they try to stay in status and keep their EAD current, but if that's not possible because of COVID, however, they're being petitioned by a United States citizen spouse, it may be possible for them to remain in the United States if they fall out of status and still be able to complete the adjustment of status process. But this is like a very nuanced area of the law, and so I think it requires an email as well. So I would suggest send me an email because these details are a little more than just a general, require more than just a general response, and I don't want to confuse anyone. So potentially the answer is yes. I still think overall probably yes, you will be able to adjust status even if your employment authorization is going to expire, but I do want to qualify that and say that we should have further discussion. So la pregunta era si la persona, en seguimiento de la pregunta previa, si la persona tiene un permiso de trabajo que se va a vencer y si esa aplicación no ha sido procesada antes de que se vence el permiso de trabajo, es recomendable que la persona salga del país. La respuesta es esa pregunta es un poco complicado o delicado. La respuesta es no necesariamente, depende de muchos factores. Así que mi recomendación es que la persona me escriba un correo electrónico para que platiquemos un poquito más esos detalles para que yo pueda contestar la pregunta con seguridad de que no le estoy dando el aconsejo equivocado.
Okay. La pregunta número 2, me parece que ya la contestaste. I think you answered this one, but dice, mi pregunta es relacionada a los pagos de estímulos y la visa religiosa. ¿Le corresponde a los que tiene R1 recibir el cheque? También, ¿ustedes tienen información sobre la Embajada de Estados Unidos en Argentina? Esto para saber cuándo puedo terminar mi trámite.
Sí, ok. So, individuos que están en los Estados Unidos presentes con la visa de no inmigrante R1 para servicios religiosos también califican por el pago de estímulo, mientras que tienen el número de seguro social emitido. So, si no han recibido todavía el número de seguro social, no creo que vayan a recibir el pago de estímulo, pero si tienen el número de seguro social y se han registrado con el servicio de impuestos por irs.gov o porque registraron impuestos el año pasado o en el 2018, deberían de calificar para el pago de estímulo. Si no lo han recibido, pueden escribirme a mi correo electrónico mcrooms@usilg.net para desarrollar más esa pregunta, a ver si hay alguna razón por cual no recibieron el pago. Oh, y en seguimiento, sorry, the second part of that was...
If we have information about the embassy in Argentina.
Right. So currently, I'll do it in English and then Spanish. So currently the U.S. embassies are closed. So non-immigrant visas and as well as immigrant visas are not actively being processed. When will they resume? I do not have the answer to that question. However, what I do recommend is that anyone who requires access to the U.S. Embassy for processing an application, that they visit the specific website, the specific Department of State website that corresponds to that country to know when those services will resume. So, por el momento, las embajadas americanas al extranjero están cerradas. No es, por decir, no están procesando aplicaciones de no inmigrante, tampoco están procesando aplicaciones de inmigrante, gente que viene o que va a venir con residencia. No estamos seguros cuándo van a resumir esos servicios, pero lo que aconsejo es que cada persona que necesita acceso a las embajadas para procesar sus aplicaciones, que visiten el sitio web del Departamento de Estado por el país específico. So, el sitio web del Departamento de Estado es dos.gov. So, recomiendo que visiten el sitio web específico de DOS para cada país para saber cuándo se van a resumir esos servicios.
Okay. Thank you. The next one. Is it a problem when individuals apply marriage-based green cards when people have not filed taxes? For instance, they did not pay taxes since they did not have a W-2 form.
Okay, that question it depends on who we're talking about. So it depends if we're talking about the petitioner not filing taxes or the beneficiary not filing taxes. So before February of this year, February 24th of this year, I would have said it's not quite a big deal if the beneficiary has not filed taxes. However, now under the public charge assessment, immigration is requesting submission of financial documents for the applicant and the petitioner. And so as a beneficiary, so as an applicant for your lawful permanent resident card, you're not required you were not required to file taxes if you're not working. However, if you have filed taxes and you have established credit in the United States and you do have financial documents or a paper trail, then those documents are likely going to be used in the application process. However, I at this point, my recommendation is always to consult with an attorney and to work with an attorney if possible, just given the complexity of the issues surrounding public charge. I think it's a very difficult time for any attorney to answer those questions with confidence without having more information about that person's financial situation. So I'm sorry if that's not a direct answer, but it's just not an easy topic anymore since February 24th of this year.
Mm-hmm.
So, should I do that in Spanish?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So, la pregunta es si alguien que está pidiendo la residencia a través de una aplicación de ajuste de estado legal, si no registraron impuestos, ¿cómo afectaría eso a la aplicación? Mi respuesta es, depende de quién es la persona que no registró impuestos, si fue el solicitante o el beneficiario. Y la verdad, en este tiempo, desde el 24 de febrero de este año, cuando la regla de carga pública tomó efecto, esta pregunta no es tan fácil de contestar. En el pasado, hubiera dicho que una persona solicitando la residencia no necesariamente tenía que registrar impuestos si no estaba trabajando. Y el solicitante, el peticionario, siempre tiene que mostrar que pueden sostener a la persona financieramente y eso se establece con los impuestos. Pero si no han registrado impuestos, pueden tratar de conseguir a alguien que sea un co-solicitante para que ese requisito financiero esté cumplido. Pero la verdad es que responder a esa pregunta es difícil sin saber la foto completa o sin ver la foto completa de la situación financiera de la pareja. Así que mi consejo es que la persona que hizo esa pregunta, si gusten, pueden mandarme un correo electrónico con más detalles para desarrollar más ese tema o esa respuesta.
Thank you. The next question. Could you please let us know where we may find this information about the current administration's position on the potential deportation of non-citizens who are supporters of the Pacific protest?
Mm-hmm.
This person would like to share this information widely.
Sure. So that statement that I made was based only on my viewing of the president's speech yesterday in the Rose Garden, in which it has been said, and now again, I don't know to what extent this is going to be observed, but what was said by the president is that people who are involved in the protests, who are determined to be breaking the law, will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. And that's not a quote, but that was the gist of what the president said. And so I'm not saying that people who participate in the protests peacefully are necessarily going to be arrested and prosecuted to the greatest extent, but the fear becomes people who are present at the protests where perhaps other people are engaged in unlawful activity could be swept up, because my observation, and this is again just based on my observation watching things that are unfolding on various news sources, I'm seeing police rounding people up. And so I don't know to what extent police are asking questions, or to what extent police or law enforcement is, sort of trying to sift out who are the people who are actually engaged in unlawful activity and who are not. And so my fear is for individuals who do not have lawful status in the United States, who are present during a situation in which law enforcement is just rounding people up. At that point, if someone is arrested and is in custody, and if ICE and Customs and Border Patrol are, participants in this apprehension, my fear is that those people are going to be exposed to a very great risk of having removal proceedings then initiated against them. So I just want to, make it clear that my statement is not that by engaging in peaceful protests, folks will be arrested, and if they're undocumented, they will absolutely be deported. But what happens is that they're exposing themselves to a situation in which they may be deported, especially if they're being, accused of engaging in unlawful activity. Regardless of whether or not they are, it's very chaotic, and so the risk exists that someone could be apprehended, by mistake. But it doesn't matter, because once they're in custody and once they're processed, then unfortunately they're exposed to that risk and they're subject to that risk.
You want to say that?
I'll translate that, yeah. Okay. So, la pregunta era, o la solicitud más bien era que si podía yo ofrecer la información o un enlace o un lugar en específico donde se encuentra la información en que gente indocumentada corre riesgo de ser deportada si participan en las protestas. Y quiero aclarar que lo que yo dije es que personas que no tienen estado legal, que participan en las protestas, se expuestan a un riesgo. No es actualmente o necesariamente el caso que van a ser deportados. Y no hay información que yo leí específicamente que dice eso. A lo que yo me refiero es, ayer yo escuché al presidente Trump anunciar que personas que están participando en actividades ilegales durante las protestas, que van a ser arrestados y que los van a... what is the word for prosecute? Van a ponerles los cargos máximos por actividades ilegales. So, el presidente específicamente se refería a personas que están participando en actividades ilegales. Pero lo que yo estoy observando en las noticias y en línea es que personas ahora que están presentes en las protestas, estamos viendo que la policía está arrestando a grupos. Y yo no sé si necesariamente la policía está haciendo el esfuerzo para distinguir quiénes son las personas que están actualmente participando en actividades ilegales o no. So, si alguien está presente, yo pienso, en base a lo que yo he visto, que están expuestos al riesgo de ser detenidos o arrestados. Y si inmigración o oficiales del Departamento de Seguridad Nacional están participando en estas detenciones, entonces hay más riesgo de que gente sin papeles, sin estado legal, se expuesta a la posibilidad de ser puestos en un proceso de remoción. Eso no es algo que estoy diciendo que es garantizado que va a suceder, no estoy diciendo que es necesariamente que alguien que está presente en la protesta sea arrestada, pero simplemente en base a lo que yo estoy viendo, pienso que una persona que no tiene papeles sí se está exponiendo a la posibilidad de ser arrestado, y si no tienen papeles más, están más expuestos a la posibilidad de que inicien trámite de deportación contra esa persona. So, son posibilidades, no son actualmente cosas que, están garantizadas, por decirlo, pero no quiero que esté claro que yo no estoy, what's the word for discourage? No estoy, no quiero impedir a que una persona participe en lo que ellos sienten es necesario para expresar su política. Esa no es mi meta. Mi meta es equipar a la persona con la información necesaria para saber cómo protegerse si es que deciden hacerlo. So just to emphasize, my goal is not in any way to instill fear in people and to scare people away from expressing their political views, which are very important. I understand that. I simply hope to share the tools and the information that is necessary for the person to be protected in the event that they are present during an arrest situation. And so, and that is why we will be uploading as soon as possible. We're going to be uploading the Know Your Rights presentation on our website. These are my observations, and it's just based on what I'm seeing on TV and what I'm reading in the news. And so just having been an immigration lawyer for some years and sort of seeing the tactics of Department of Homeland Security in, how people are arrested and detained and referred to removal proceedings, upon learning that their presence is now going to be, or learning that they're going to be present at these protests, for me, it causes the need to express or to, suggest that people be highly vigilant and just cautious and aware of their surroundings.
Okay. We have 4 more questions. I just want to be cautious of the time. Are you okay continuing?
Yeah, we can go for it. We can finish.
Vamos a continuar con las preguntas y terminarlas. Ojalá se puedan quedar acá con nosotros, y si no, como les digo, estamos grabando este video. If you would like to stay for the other questions, feel free to do so. We would love for you to stay. However, we are mindful of the time. I am recording this session, so this will be emailed to you as well. Okay. So the next question, it says, what if someone who is a citizen and files jointly with their spouse who is also a citizen, but their dependents do not have an ITIN? Do they qualify for the stimulus check?
Unfortunately, if someone files taxes, whether it be independent, single, or married, if they include anyone on their tax return who does not have a social security number, then they will not receive the stimulus check. So in this case, if both filers have US citizenship, but they have a dependent who does not have a social security number, they will not receive the stimulus check. So I will qualify that with saying, if that dependent was included in 2018, but not in 2019, or if they haven't filed 2019 taxes yet, it's possible, and again, I would recommend speaking with a certified public accountant, it's possible that they could file their 2019 taxes and exclude their dependent and receive that benefit. But I think that at that point, the discussion, it merits a discussion with the accountant as to whether or not that's in their interests, and weighing all of the pros and cons for making that choice. So la pregunta es si una pareja que registró impuestos como casados y en donde los dos son ciudadanos estadounidenses, también registraron un depende o dependiente en los impuestos que no tiene número de seguro social. Si esa pareja todavía debe de esperar recibir el pago de estímulo federal, y la respuesta es desafortunadamente no. Una pareja, aunque tengan ciudadanía estadounidense, que incluye una persona como dependiente en sus impuestos que no tiene seguro social, no va a recibir ese pago. Ahora, si el dependiente fue incluido en los impuestos del 2018 y no han registrado todavía los impuestos del 2019, deben de platicar con su contador sobre si vale la pena tal vez registrar los impuestos del 2019 excluyendo a ese dependiente. Posiblemente determinan que sí o no, pero si no han registrado todavía los impuestos del 2019, posiblemente pueden todavía recuperar ese pago estímulo.
Okay, thank you. Tenemos otra pregunta aquí en the question and answer box. Dice, si una persona ha estado recibiendo beneficios de estampillas o medical por algún tiempo, ¿podrán arreglar estatus migratorio en un futuro?
La respuesta en general es sí, podrían, pero depende de muchas circunstancias. La prueba de carga pública toma a varios factores en cuenta, así que depende de cuándo la persona estuvo recibiendo esos beneficios, por cuánto tiempo y para quién, si fue para la persona pidiendo la residencia o si fue para, digamos, sus hijos nacidos aquí. Eso depende de varias cosas, pero la respuesta es posiblemente sí. El solo hecho de haber recibido beneficios públicos no quiere decir que la persona por siempre va a ser prohibido de arreglar su estatus migratorio residente. Si los beneficios estuvieron siendo recibidos recién, posiblemente van a tener que esperar un poquito para curar ese tiempo o para mostrar que son capaces de sostener la casa sin recibir esos beneficios. Eso depende de muchas circunstancias, pero últimamente la respuesta es sí, es posible.
Okay. Thank you. The next question, can you explain a little bit more on the possible problems with immigration protesters can face? Also, how can the immigrant community working across cities with different curfews make sure they are not faced with possible apprehensions?
That's a good question. Okay, so again, I just want to emphasize that these statements are being made based on my observations, just based on my experience as an immigration attorney and based on my observations on things that are unfolding in the news in these protest areas. And so what I have seen is situations in which police are sort of just rounding people up. So not necessarily asking questions before arresting, but just arresting en masse. And then, whatever happens post-arrest will happen. However, how does this affect members of the immigrant community? So it depends. I mean, necessarily being arrested does not absolutely translate to the person will find themselves in deportation proceedings. I want to make that clear. But it does depend on who is arresting and whether or not charges are being filed. And so if folks are active in peaceful protest, my hope is that they have nothing to worry about. However, we've seen, I've seen on the news I've seen situations or reports in which reporters are saying that police have stopped a group of cars and just arrested everyone that were in the cars. And this was just in Los Angeles yesterday. And so cars were stopped in the street. They were not allowed to proceed. And the occupants of those vehicles were being arrested. So I don't know what process was being, done or taken, what steps were being taken by law enforcement to ensure that they were arresting people who are actually involved in illegal activity. I don't know, right? So there is, I do want to qualify that, but in the event that someone finds themselves in law enforcement's custody who does not have status, it's just a risk. It's very risky because in the event that charges are filed against the person and the person does not have legal status, criminal charges and convictions can result in ICE apprehending those people and transferring them to immigration custody if they are in state custody. And so being in state custody as someone who is undocumented is always, for me, a very scary prospect, because at that point, if the federal agency, which is ICE, detects the person, then they'll put an ICE hold. And so that would mean the initiation of immigration removal proceedings. So again, I don't want to, I'm not trying to instill fear, and I don't want people to translate or to interpret what I'm saying or interpret my words as declaring that if you participate in peaceful protest, then you're going to find yourselves arrested in immigration proceedings. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if someone chooses or elects to peacefully protest, they should be aware of their surroundings. They should be aware of which law enforcement bodies are in the area, and they should be aware of people engaging in unlawful activity who are around them, and they want to distance themselves from that because they just don't want to find themselves caught up in a roundup by law enforcement and then being, faced with charges of engaging in unlawful activity. Because, as I said, I mean, the president's words yesterday in his speech were that people who are engaging in unlawful activity are going to be prosecuted at, the highest level. And so I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, but what I would hate for is for someone who is engaging in peaceful protest to be confused for someone who is engaging in unlawful activity and then finding themselves in a very precarious situation. So just be aware of who's around you, of what's going on around you, and distance yourself from unlawful activity to avoid being mistaken for being confused for being someone participating in unlawful activity is what I strongly recommend. And so, ahora en español, solo para aclarar, lo que yo estoy diciendo no es necesariamente que la participación en protesta pacífica va a resultar con arresto y deportación. Esas no son mis palabras. Lo que yo a lo que quiero llamar atención es que una persona que está participando en actividades de protesta ahora, que deben de reconocer cosas que están pasando alrededor, que deben de tomar precaución. Si miran a personas participando en actividades ilegales, deben de alejarse de eso, porque lo peor sería que si llegan autoridades a arrestar y se encuentra la persona indocumentada arrestada, si hay cargos que ponen contra esa persona al momento que están en cárcel del Estado, inmigración tiene el poder de detectarlos y transferirlos a custodia de inmigración. Entonces, no quiero asustar a nadie y no estoy diciendo que la gente no debe de expresar su política, para nada. Lo que estoy diciendo es que si van a exigir su derecho de protesta pacífica, que lo hagan con precaución, que estén conscientes de lo que está sucediendo alrededor, y si vean actividades ilegales sucediendo, que se alejen para que no se encuentran detenidos si es que llegan autoridades a arrestar grupos, para que no se expuestan a riesgo de que se encuentran en custodia del Estado, porque es así como inmigración detecta a mucha gente y los transfieren a trámite de deportación.
Thank you. The next question. ¿El estímulo económico solo es una vez o va a continuar mandando?
Por el momento recibimos la cantidad las cantidades de 1,200 o 2,400, dependiendo de los ingresos. No sé si va a haber otro paquete, posiblemente si el Congreso lo pasa, si pasa en el Senado y en la Cámara. Por el momento no tengo yo información sobre otro pago de estímulo, pero siempre existe la posibilidad si el Congreso vota que sí.
Okay. Say that in English.
Yes, so the question was, is the stimulus payment that we received a one-time payment? So for the time being, I'm only aware of that one-time payment that that began being issued in March. However, Congress, I mean, there's always talks of Congress working on future stimulus packages, whether or not that would include a pay or a stimulus payment to eligible people, I don't know. For the time being, I'm not aware of any future stimulus payments, but I would say that, I mean, if Congress passes any bills or any laws or any future packages that would also include payment, then yes, I mean, I guess then people would be able to receive future funding.
Yes. Thank you, Monica. More questions. Una persona entró con visitor visa I-94 con permiso por 5 meses y hace 2 meses se le venció. ¿Puede renovar la I-94 todavía? No pudo salir debido al COVID-19.
Okay. Esa es una buena pregunta. So, esa respuesta es difícil. So, la persona debería de haber extendido o pedido la extensión antes de que se venciera su permiso I-94. En ciertas circunstancias, digamos, debido a razones humanitarias, posiblemente puede intentar de recuperarlo, pero eso estamos viendo es una opción muy difícil de lograr, pero yo no soy de las personas que dice que es imposible, eso siempre existe posibilidad, pero depende de circunstancias. Para eso seguramente recomiendo que me llamen o que me manden un correo electrónico para platicar los detalles. Con toda honestidad, nosotros decimos cómo es o cómo vemos la situación. Si actualmente lograron someter la extensión antes de que se venciera, pero no han recibido la respuesta todavía, eso no es problema. La extensión de estado legal, la forma I-539, se somete y regularmente la respuesta no se recibe hasta meses después de haberlo sometido. Entonces, si se venció el I-94 después de someter la I-539, no hay problema por el momento, pero si no sometieron esa solicitud para extender el estatus, probablemente no se va a poder recuperar esa visa, pero hay que explorar la posibilidad. So the question was, if someone entered the country on a visitor visa and was issued an I-94, and their I-94 expired 2 months ago, and they were not able to extend, whether or not there is any possibility of extending it now. So my answer to that is most likely it's not going to be possible to extend the I-94 since it's expired 2 months ago. I understand that the delay was caused by COVID-19, but typically immigration will require that these applications be submitted timely. And so most likely that I-94 that visa is going to have been terminated by virtue of overstaying that I-94. However, it could depend on the circumstances. So despite sort of a hardline approach that immigration tends to take, it's possible if there is sufficient humanitarian bases that they may retroactively extend the visa. So I would recommend definitely contacting our office to discuss that possibility. But, as a rule, I mean, we will be very honest about what the prospects are. And so it just sounds like in this situation, it's probably not going to be possible.
Y las personas deciden aplicar por separado MFS en sus income tax para que la persona que tiene seguro social pueda tener el cheque de estímulo, ¿no afecta al momento de hacer la carta de sostenimiento?
No debe de afectar, y la razón es porque el solicitante o el peticionario está reportando sus ingresos como son. So, el hecho de que están registrando impuestos casados pero separados, de todos modos están reportando el ingreso del hogar, ¿ok? So, ese ingreso no creo que cambie debido a que están registrando los impuestos casados pero separados. So, no debe de perjudicar en el sentido que descalifica a la persona para poder pedir o al beneficiario, no creo que va a tener efecto negativo.
Ok, perfecto. Ok, y la última pregunta dice, so the last question, how can the working immigrants ensure that they are protected if they are in apprehension while their work commute during the curfew enactments?
How can
the working immigrants ensure that they are protected if they are in an apprehension while they're work? I'm guessing it's while they're coming to and from
Commuting
work
to and from
during the
work.
curfew enactment, if they were to be stopped.
So my understanding is that, I mean, at least the most recent thing that I've read is that there folks who are commuting to and from work are not supposed to be apprehended for violating the curfew. And so what my recommendation would be is to find a way to prove that you're going and coming from work. So if you have maybe, I don't know, your work card to show like that you're on the commute, you're traversing the commute to and from work. However you can establish that you are going and coming from work, I would say do so. That's the first thing. Now, if someone is pulled over or stopped for violating the curfew, if that person has lawful status or is authorized to be in the United States and to be working, if they're issued, I mean, I guess it really just depends on to what extent law enforcement is going to enforce the curfew. If they're going to issue tickets or if they're going to arrest, that will not necessarily result in losing that status. I will actually have to do more research as to what charges are going to be instituted against someone who's found to be violating the curfew. I'm not totally sure yet, but I would certainly say that if you can avoid being out during the curfew, to do so, and if not, just find a way to really to stress and to emphasize that you are in your commute to and from work, so that you can avoid any kind of arrests or citations. And again, if you have permission, you're authorized to work and you're authorized to be in the United States, and you are apprehended for violating the curfew, I don't think that will result in losing that status.
Okay. Do you want to answer it in Spanish?
Yeah, so la pregunta era si una persona está detenida por violar la toca de queda, entonces porque están afuera durante la hora en que han ordenado que personas estén en casa, ¿cómo pueden protegerse contra las consecuencias de ser detenidos por la toca de queda o por violar la toca de queda? Y mi respuesta es, tengo entendido que personas que están en proceso de ir o regresar del trabajo, que no deben de ser arrestados o no les deben de dar multa. Pero si en dado caso que se encuentran en situaciones donde la policía o autoridades los están cuestionando, deben de hacer todo lo posible para mostrar o comprobar que están en el transcurso de ida o de regreso del trabajo. The word for commute has escaped me. Claudia, do you?
Simplemente el tiempo que nos toca de ir y regresar al trabajo sería lo que estamos refiriéndonos acá. Es comprobar, ¿no? Es tener algún tipo de comprobante que le diga al oficial que ustedes están yendo al trabajo o están regresando a su hogar del trabajo.
So parece que la palabra que estaba buscando es conmutar. So, si están en el transcurso de ir o de regresar de trabajo, deben de hacer todo lo posible para mostrar eso. So, si tienen algo que tal vez sí el empleador puede darles una carta que explica cuáles son sus horas de trabajo, o si tienen una manera de comprobarlo, háganlo por favor, porque yo creo que con eso entonces deben de ser parte de la excepción de personas que están violando la toca de queda. Pero si la persona que está siendo detenida es alguien que tiene estado legal o permiso de trabajo, no pienso que deben de perder ese estado legal o el permiso de trabajo solo por haber sido detenido por por la toca de queda. Eso no es algo que verdaderamente me preocupa, en términos de estado legal. Pero, siempre evitar custodia de autoridades es lo mejor, es lo que deseamos. Así que pienso que lo mejor sería poder comprobar su horario del trabajo y tener algo en escrito tal vez del empleador que especifica cuáles son las horas de trabajo.
Yes. And so with that, there's one more that just came in. It says, how long can you stay overseas if flights are not happening due to COVID-19 and you have a green card or conditional or green card extension?
That's a good question. So ordinarily it's not recommended. So anyone who has a lawful permanent resident status, it's not recommended that they remain outside of the United States for more than 6 months, but sometimes that's inevitable, but definitely not recommended to be out for more than a year, just because it would be, upon returning, that person would be subject to an assessment of whether or not they abandoned their residency. So the rule of thumb is to limit any time outside of the United States to less than a year, unless the person has a reentry permit. However, if that's not possible due to COVID, then what needs to be done is the person should do everything in their power to compile proof that the reason they could not return to the United States was due to COVID, which I don't think should be too hard at this time, because when a person is forced to remain outside of the United States for circumstances beyond their control, then they should have an easier time to rebut a finding of abandoning the green card. So my advice is certainly to compile as much information or proof as possible that would show that they were outside of the United States for reasons beyond their control.
All right, and I think that I don't see any other one. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senia, too. Senia, do you have any questions via Facebook that I didn't catch?
No, we're actually, all the questions were answered through these original questions, so that was good. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
Sounds good. Well, no tenemos ya más preguntas. Muchísimas gracias por su tiempo. Ojalá y esta información que recibieron el día de hoy por parte de Mónica haya sido de beneficio en su situación. Por favor, ella ha compartido con nosotros su correo electrónico, al igual que su número de teléfono y el sitio web de las oficinas de US Immigration Law Group. Por favor, comuníquese con ellas directamente, o también si se registraron al webinar, tienen mi información de cómo comunicarse conmigo. De nuevo, les agradecemos por parte del Centro Main Street y del grupo de US Immigration Law Group por parte de Mónica y Senia. ¿Algo más, Mónica?
Eso es todo. Muchísimas gracias, Claudia. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hasta luego. Hasta la próxima.